Today I wanted to talk about some of the slightly less monetary side of economics, or how we look at economics in big data solving social problems. So when we think about economics as the study of choice, how do we make choices? How do individuals, how do households, communities, firms, and the entire society, right? We go to the voting box and our government. In order to make good choices, we have to be able to sort of estimate the potential outcomes of those choices and the pros and cons and costs and benefits of those outcomes, right? To do that, we can evaluate policies, we can look at business strategies better and sort of analyze the rationality of people's choices. And that also allows us to sort of study when we have non-optimal choices being made and things aren't working as rationally as they should, or we're observing poor outcomes in markets or in lives. And when you think about how many choices we make and how many levels of choices that are making in society, the range of topics you can study in economics is really broad, really, really broad. We look at all kinds of things, and in the last decade or two, economists have been really making waves, looking at environmental economics, urban planning and development, looking at job determinants, discrimination, labor market outcomes, and inequality. So in here, one of the first things I wanted to bring to our attention is back in 2019, the economists got together and they bought out the entire front page of the Wall Street Journal as a plea to the government, with thousands of economists signing a petition, along with 27 Nobel laureates in economics and every one of the head of those Fed reserves that they were just talking about, asking to put a carbon tax on pollution, right? To use market mechanisms and to price pollution to try to decrease overall pollution, getting at a way of impacting climate change, right? That if we can price it and market it and decrease it so that way there's a cost to polluting in a more tangible way. Another area that we look at is inequality. And a great way of looking at inequality is looking at your income mobility. The mobility of both you over your lifetime, of what type of income are you born into versus when you grow up and age your income, as well as over generations of families. So say when you're 30 or 40, do you have a higher or lower purchasing pattern than your parents did when they were 30 or 40, and their grandparents from there, right? Are kids doing better and growing up and having better lives than their parents, or worse? So when you look at this map, this is a map of generational mobility. And what it looks at is if you were born into a low-income household, so someone who earns in the bottom 20 percentile of our income, if we think of the poorest to the wealthiest, from 0 to 100%, so someone born into a low-income home has the likelihood of reaching that top 20%, being in the 80 to 100% top earners in America, right? So when we look at this map, the red and yellow areas represent relatively low probability that if you're born into a low-income home, you'll likely grow up into a wealthy individual as you age. The green areas represent a higher likelihood. So if we can better understand why 10.8% of kids in Salt Lake City who are born into low income go on to earn a high wages, and 8.5 do in Minneapolis, maybe we can design better cities and we can improve the scores like in Atlanta, where there's only a 4.5% chance of climbing that income ladder as you age, right? We can start to understand what's happening and try to make better policies around that, and maybe design better cities where kids have a better chance, right? Using this information, the city of Seattle actually worked with economists for a couple years, just recently, and they have a housing voucher program for low-income homes. Well, they tracked that generational mobility across all the cities and neighborhoods in Seattle. And they worked with economists to do an experiment where for an entire year or two, as people came in to apply for their housing vouchers, right, you can see here the red dots are going to be households. Right on our left is where we're starting before they apply and they get their applications, and where they live. Now for for the whole year, half of the people who came in, they went through the regular process, they got their vouchers they always had, thank you, have a good day. The other half of the group, they said, we're going to give you the voucher, but would you mind giving us about an hour of your time to talk to you about neighborhoods where you can use this voucher, and we show that kids have a better likelihood of graduating college and carrying on into higher livelihoods, right? And they talked to them about that and gave them more information. And if you notice on our right-hand side, we're looking at where did they move and use their vouchers. when we look at the treatment group down here, the one with intervention, right, the ones we had a chat with, you'll notice a lot more of the dots moved into that yellow area, right? That information matters. And hopefully, as we're going to track those households in this experiment, we're going to see if their kids do, in fact, do better. And then hopefully implement a wider program in Seattle where this can be used, right? And potentially spread that program across other cities. Now, another area where economists work at a lot is around discrimination. And we run experiments like that one in Seattle, right? So a couple famous experiments in economics. Excuse me. In Chicago and New York, economists hired hundreds of actors. They hired hundreds of actors, and they gave them the exact same resume to go apply to fast food restaurants. Right? And the only thing that was different was the race of the person doing the application. Right? The names, the details, where you graduated, your GPA, your jobs, all of those things. It was just who handed it in. Right? And they noticed that, unfortunately, minorities were less likely to be called back, even with an identical resume of someone else who dropped it off who was white. Now, to test that on higher level positions, economists did it again, but this time you don't typically drop off your application in person, so they didn't have to hire actors. So for thousands of ads across the US, for clerical work and administrative jobs, they sent in identical resumes, but with what they considered ethnic-sounding names and white-sounding names as the differentiation, right, as you email in your resume. And what they found was your likelihood of being called back, so the callback rate to get an interview, right? Nobody's saying you're getting the job yet. Obviously, the jig's up. Once they call you, this wasn't a real application, right? We were doing an experiment. We noticed, though, that unfortunately the rates get less as you move into Hispanic, ethnic, and other sounding names, right? That there is a correlation there. So we can at least start quantifying discrimination in a real way. Now, Airbnb has worked with economists because they realized they recently had a discrimination problem on their site as well. So a few years back, we noticed that minority owners who were renting their homes, right, or their mother-in-law suites, right, the basement apartments out, homes in neighborhoods, were getting less applications for rentals, right? Less people were applying to rent their Airbnbs. Versus comparable listings, same square feet, same neighborhood, but that happened to have white owners. So working with economists, what they realized is the old website used to put the host photo directly on the search results, right? So before you even looked at the apartment to get real information, right? Does this look like a neighborhood you want to stay in? Does it have enough rooms for your family? Suddenly you're getting that person's face in there. So they moved them. We told them to move them, working with economists, so they did on parts of the site. It comes off the search result page, and it comes onto the main primary page. And they found if you have viewers at least look at the site, the pictures of the actual apartment, right? Which is what this decision should be based on. You're renting a room. You're not applying for a friend, right? In there, if they look at the units of the apartment before they see who owns it, suddenly those rates shot back up. Right? That again is just how can we influence how people make choices to increase it to be more rational around what decisions actually matter in there. So if you go to Airbnb now, you'll notice that this is their primary layout. Right? Another place we look at it is in gender wage gaps. Right? So as you likely know, unfortunately all of you in this room may earn less than your male counterparts as you age, right? As everyone else on this side of the room is very familiar with as well. We've made a lot of progress, right? You go back to the 80s, we were only earning 60 cents on every dollar for a man. All right, we're up to a solid 80 or so. It's actually stagnated since about that for the last 10 years, but we're at about 80% now. But it's not so quick and easy to say, all right, women are totally being shortchanged, and we're making 20 cents on every dollar because we're fully discriminated against, right? That might be part of the story, but we really have to untangle a lot of pieces. Women and men tend to work in different jobs. We make slightly different choices, right? So it's not as easy to gut reaction say, well, that must be all discrimination, right? One of the ways we look at it is we look at what type of job and industries do you work in? And one of the things we notice is that women tend to work in lower paying industries even within the same field. So say when women become doctors or we become lawyers, we don't necessarily become surgeons or corporate lawyers, right? The ones on those ends that tend to earn more. We self-select into slightly different jobs, right, that tend to have slightly lower pay. So we have to consider what industries are you working in. We also take time off to have kids, right? We take some time off away from the labor market, which means that just on paper, even if you're competing against another woman, you may have less years or months of experience if you took some time away, right? The loss of experience can cost you some in a market. We also, unfortunately, have found that women might come into job negotiations with slightly lower expectations of salary, and we maybe don't haggle as well as men do. So when it comes to negotiating our salary, we might take a slightly lower offer before we should, right? Which is something we want to consider when you go out negotiating. So when we look at it and break that down, right, kind of solving this puzzle, why do women earn 20 cents less? If we look at it kind of unconditionally, we earn about 20 cents less. But if we start adding in all the pieces, controlling for years of experience in industry, right, looking at cognitive controls and adding this in, what we find is that around 5 to 7% of the gender gap's not fully explainable, which means that's probably the amount we could kind of attribute to discrimination out of it. Right, that's not explained away by other parts. Now, economics is more about providing tools, right? We can apply these tools to so many different industries. So if you're the type of person who likes solving puzzles, if you're interested in some of the bigger topics, national level, local, and household level type work, we offer a number of courses and a number of areas where you can apply these tools, depending on what you're interested in. Economics does have a decent amount to do with money, but it's not all money. We work on a lot of other topics too. Thank you, guys. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer a few, if anyone's interested. I have a couple minutes. So we do a little bit of work of both. So it's a great question, the work environment or the climate environment. So with environmental economics in that class up there, as well as the one with the carbon tax and stuff, that's more looking at environmental. We do look at work conditions, efficiency in marketplaces, management type of practices as well within economics too. So in this one, I was looking more at the broader environmental field, which looks at the implications sometimes of businesses and business practices on the surrounding environment. But there are a lot of economists who focus on internal environment within companies and work and efficiency as well. Absolutely. Yeah. How will women ever get it, right? Let's hope. I mean, there continues to be some progress. So an interesting area that's becoming experimented with and other areas that we're seeing is one of the areas, so you saw on this graph, was that we take maternity leave, and that tends to lower our years of experience, right? So somewhat quantifiably, sometimes someone can come in with even more experience than you. As we see certain countries and areas starting to adopt paternity leave, and we see men starting to leave with similar range and capacity as women around birth of children, we won't have that difference in the job market, right? If men tended to leave around the same time and also took their 6 months off here and there and others, we might still have some, but that'll help diminish it, right? As we start to adopt more flexible scheduling and we see a little more telework, that's allowed more women to stay in the labor market or to enter back part-time in different ways that really hasn't before. So we're starting to see some of that range diminish over time. I'm optimistic to say ever yes. Soon, it'll be a while, right? But I do see positive patterns in a lot of the recent updates and laws where we actually see the exact structure of where these differences came from can potentially diminish over time as we adopt more family-friendly policies across both genders. Great question. Anything else out there? If you do have any similar to the other one, feel free to ever email me or anyone else in the department. We're happy to chat. We love what we do. I could talk about it for a real long time if I wanted to.
At UTC, the Department of Finance and Economics offers you an exciting and innovative approach to studying in these fields. Apart from regular classroom instruction, we have a world-class experiential learning opportunity called the Smile Fund, in which students manage over $700,000 of real money. 86% of our majors complete internships while they study here. 91% of our graduates work in their area of interest or go on to graduate school or start a business of their own. Our 10-terminal Bloomberg lab is one of the largest such labs anywhere and students get exposed to the information portal used by all practitioners in the field of economics and finance. We take students to New York City every year for the Global Asset Management Education Forum, where students get to hear and meet the leading practitioners in the field. Our students present undergraduate research at conferences and participate in research competitions regularly. We have won the Regional CFA Research Challenge 4 years in a row. Additionally, we have a variety of student clubs that allow students to learn about careers in finance and economics and build a valuable network for when they get out. And you get to study abroad in a variety of different locations while you are at the Rollins College